Welcome, everyone. I'm Rachel Bustamante, Campaign Coordinator at Plastic Pollution Coalition. Thank you for joining our March webinar, Grasping at Straws, Policy Solutions for Safe Drinking Water. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a nonprofit communications and advocacy organization that collaborates with an expansive global alliance of organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, and regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. Today, we're going to have 4 poll questions to get a sense of who is joining us. Each question will appear only for about 20 seconds, so please answer quickly. So poll number 1, where are you joining us from today? Great, let's see what we got. Looks like we've got a lot of people joining us from out west. I'm on the Northeast side, and some folks in the Northeast, and a few outside of the US as well. Glad you're all here with us. Poll 2, what best describes the area of focus for your work? Looks like most joining are from a nonprofit or NGO, got some government and policy, corporation and business are the top ones, and other. So we're just glad you're here listening in with us. And our third question, how many plastic water bottles are bought per minute worldwide? Okay. So majority put 1 million, and that's actually the correct answer for this. 1 million plastic water bottles are bought per minute across the globe. And on to our last question. How do you consume the majority of your drinking water and select all that apply? This is to get a sense of what you do personally. Okay, so we can see most are drinking filtered tap water, a good amount are drinking tap water as well, and just a few are drinking some plastic bottled water. Thank you for participating in our poll questions. Before we dive into the panel discussion today, I want to take a moment to introduce the topic. You've probably seen plastic straws making headlines based on the new executive order from the president. But plastic straws are just scratching the surface of the bigger problem. And the real issue is the overwhelming production and use of single-use plastics. The plastics industry wants us to think that these products are safe and convenient, but in reality, they're poisoning us and the planet with toxic chemicals and microplastics. Take bottled water. Accessing clean public water is a major issue in the United States. Nearly half of US tap water contains PFAS, and millions are still reliant on toxic lead pipes. But some communities are harmed more than others. Low-income, rural, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities are most impacted. In the bottled water industry, they're profiting from this crisis, selling expensive bottled water that's energy intensive and adds to plastic pollution. And that's where our Filter Not Bottle campaign comes in. We're advocating for water filters to be provided in impacted communities as a proactive solution to protect public health while those root causes of water contamination are addressed, which in some places can take years or even decades. So we invite you to sign onto our petition to the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure access to safe drinking water while preventing the exacerbation of harms caused by single-use plastic water bottles. Water insecurity is rising as our outdated and underfunded infrastructure is put under more strain and exacerbated by climate change and extreme weather events. Meanwhile, the bottled water industry is privatizing our access to water and set to ramp up production, with projections placing it as a $66 billion industry by 2030. So today, we'll explore how bottled water is undermining trust in public tap water, the health risks of bottles, and how we can dispel the myths around bottled water. Most importantly, we'll talk about the solutions that already exist that are critical to advancing water equity. Today, we are going to hear from Rachel Dawn Davis, Douglas Main, and Gina Ramirez. Now I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Gina Ramirez. Gina is the Director of Midwest Environmental Health at NRDC. Gina works to further sustainable land use and zoning rules that can provide crucial protections to areas of Chicago, like the Southeast side, that are burdened with cumulative industrial pollution. Gina is an active member of the Coalition to Ban Pet Coke and the Southeast Environmental Task Force. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you so much for having me. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gina. I'm so excited to be here today. Clean drinking water is just one of the many realms that I work on at Natural Resources Defense Council. And what Natural Resources Defense Council does is they work to safeguard the earth, its people, its plants and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. It's an organization that's been around for 50 years, and I have been at NRDC for 10 years. So access to safe water is a human right. With the Safe Water Initiative, we work on creating the gold standard for policy models. We know that there is no safe level of lead in the water. NRDC uses its technical, legal, and policy expertise while working closely with local partners. I myself am from an environmental justice community on the south side of Chicago, so I know firsthand the disproportional health impacts from air contamination and pollutants to soil contamination and water. At NRDC, we provide knowledge of local politics and on-the-ground realities, and we highlight problems and document health threats and pressure officials to address these issues. We worked on the Flint water crisis at NRDC, and we worked with these community groups at the front lines of these fights and other allies, and we used targeted media strategies, political pressure, and public disclosures of water testing. We litigated on behalf of local citizens to help Michigan become the national leader on lead and drinking water policies. And we've made significant progress in Michigan by securing the strongest protections against lead in drinking water in the country. And we're actively working to achieve a gold standard that can be adopted in other states. So Chicago has the most lead pipes in the country. This is actually a picture of my parents' house getting their lead service line removed. So I grew up drinking bottled water because of the mistrust in my neighborhood from industries polluting us every day. My parents just knew that we had a really old home, that we had a lead service line, and they felt it was safer for their children to drink bottled water. And so up until 1986, lead pipes were actually the legal route for the city, and that is why we have over 400,000. And so it's a daunting process to start to remove these lines. And the EPA came out with a new lead and copper rule last fall where there's like a 10-year time limit to remove these, but because Chicago has so much, it will take 20 to 25 years. It is insanely costly to replace these lead service lines. It's around $30,000. So my parents did qualify for an equity line replacement program with a lot of political pressure to qualify to get this lead service line for free. But this isn't, it was like a really daunting task for them, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork. And when you come from a low income community of color, sometimes you don't even have access to the internet. So these programs are still not ideal and accessible. And so we still see a lot of people in these communities relying on bottled water. You go to the grocery store and in every cart, you'll see cartons of bottled water. So what I do at NRDC is I'm a place-based advocate. So I really believe in the impact of community power. And so, socialization and education are key. So, not only are we advocating to have safe, clean drinking water and advocate for policies to remove these lead service lines and to create, water affordability and stronger protections. But what do we do in the meantime? We have to have accessibility to clean drinking water. And so I work with community partners to do this socialization, to do this education, to sign folks up for water testing that the city offers for free, to sign folks up for free water filters from the city and do giveaways. So this is one of the many events that I participate in the Chicago area every year. This was World Water Day last year. Actually, World Water Day is coming up this Saturday, so we'll be hosting another event. And it's just really, the peer knowledge that folks share kind of alleviates that mistrust. And like if you're hearing from your friend, like, oh, I'm using like filtered water instead of bottled water, we tend to see folks lean more towards, like taking that peer advice to use the filters. But it's just, there's a lot of multi-generational families. There's tons of children here. I'm, a new mom again. I have a 9-month-old and I have a lead service line. So it is just really daunting to have to like filter my water to wash a bottle. Like it's this extra step that folks just like don't want to take. But like once you like educate folks, like, but there's like all these detrimental impacts that can happen to your health, while you're already living in an environmental justice community that has like higher asthma rates, has higher cancer rates, and so this is something preventable. And, we all have the right to clean drinking water. Really, it takes education from, not only advocacy groups, but groups on the ground. And so I really am fortunate enough to be a place-based advocate and work with these amazing groups to just spread knowledge about clean drinking water and, reduction of single-use plastics, because it's just so detrimental to the environment and to your health if you're drinking these bottled waters. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I do.
Thank you, Gina, for sharing your experience and also exploring just how critical community trust is to our discussion on water and how that has to be central to the conversation on water. I'd next like to introduce Rachel Dawn Davis. Rachel is the Public Policy and Justice Organizer at Waterspirit. She is also chair of the Water Advocacy Committee at Lead Free New Jersey and a community architect. Since 2005, Rachel has built interdisciplinary coalitions around preventative policies, playing a key role in advancing environmental protection in New Jersey and safeguarding water quality across the Delaware River watershed. Take it away, Rachel Dawn.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you everyone tuning in live or listening to the recording. As Rachel shared, I'm Rachel Dawn Davis, Public Policy and Justice Organizer for Waterspirit. I'm zooming in from occupied Lenni Lenape land in so-called New Jersey. So what is Waterspirit? Waterspirit is a spiritual ecology nonprofit sponsored by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace that has been offering contemplative programming and advocacy opportunities centered on water as the source and sustainer of all life for over 25 years. Definitely check out the website, waterspirit.org. Water is not just a resource, it's part of a much larger web of life. Water is critical to human health, agriculture, and biodiversity. When we talk about water justice, we're really not just talking about clean drinking water, we're talking about the health of our ecosystems, the stability of our climate, and the well-being of communities. Water is life. This simple truth connects all of us, no matter our background, geography, or social status. And as we all know, our very survival depends on it. So as we go through this presentation, I want to highlight the critical issues surrounding water in New Jersey, and I hope you'll leave inspired to take action in your own way. One of the most urgent water issues in New Jersey is lead contamination. There's no safe level of lead. Lead pipes have been a persistent problem here as well, especially in older neighborhoods and in low-income communities, of course, due to redlining, where families are disproportionately impacted. Lead is particularly harmful to children, causing long-term cognitive issues and developmental delays, but it affects everybody, and it is causing disabilities we're seeing. A recent study from Montclair State University found that New Jersey has some of the highest rates of lead contamination in the country. We have a lead-free New Jersey collaborative, which interdisciplinarily focuses on replacing lead pipes and ensuring safe drinking water for all communities. And I just want to underscore what Gina said about trust and community trust. We are set up across the state in hubs, and trust remains an issue throughout the lead service line replacement process. There's still much work to be done. We have a water advocacy committee out of Lead Free New Jersey that anyone can connect with if you're interested. And while it initially focused on lead, we now include issues of PFAS, microplastics, and more. It really is vital that we all advocate for continued progress in this area, especially for the families and children most at risk. So the cost of clean water should not be a barrier to health, but unfortunately for many New Jerseyans, it is. The state has been working towards solutions in the form of legislation which aims to reduce water costs for low-income families. Waterspirit helped to lead an effort to alter the affordability criteria to be based upon ALICE data, that stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Yet Employed, data showcasing the lived experience through New Jersey United Way. They have a great database. I urge you to check that out. Accessibility is equally as important. We must ensure that every single New Jerseyan, no matter their income or zip code, every watershed resident has access to clean, safe water. It's imperative that we really push for a water system that works for everyone everywhere, not just the wealthy or privileged. Clean water, of course, should be a basic human right, not a luxury. Okay, so water pollution, particularly from plastics, is another growing concern. Plastics, especially single-use items like bottles, bags, and straws, contribute massively to pollution in our waterways. These plastics break down into smaller particles, microplastics, entering our oceans, rivers, and lakes and bodies, where they pose a serious threat to wildlife and water quality. In New Jersey, the Delaware River and the Jersey Shore are seeing the effects of plastic waste harming both ecosystems and biodiversity. And it's not just an eyesore of plastic pollution, it is danger. It's a huge danger to marine life and to the health of all of our water systems. New Jersey has taken significant steps to address this issue, such as banning single-use plastic bags and advancing legislation to reduce plastic waste. This problem will only be solved when we take collective action to reduce consumption and push for even stronger legislative measures. So definitely check out our calls to action page for related ways to prevent plastic pollution, and join us. Yeah, so I just wanted to, again, emphasize that this is, there is a growing movement in New Jersey to address these issues, and this is all interrelated. We are inspired by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, and here you'll see this quote, and I'll let you read it. There is like I said, a growing movement in New Jersey. Several key pieces of legislation are currently in progress, such as Skip the Stuff, extended producer responsibility, and pending we have Filter First legislation and ongoing efforts to make pure water more accessible and affordable for all. Also notably, what started as a local push at the Jersey Shore is now a statewide effort to require that construction sites that contain the harmful plastic, sawdust, fiberglass, silica, when materials are being cut during construction via like vacuum attachments on saws, tents and tarps. This is just one example of how local communities are taking charge. Many communities are actually following to adopt those regulations and vying for a state law to that effect. People are organizing around microplastics increasingly. We had a full room of a screening of We're All Plastic People in at our offices in January. We'll ideally be having more public hearings, rallies, and advocacy days that will give us all an opportunity to voice our concerns and demand action. I encourage all of you to get involved in any of these ways to make our communities and local waterways free from plastic pollution. But change doesn't just come from policymakers, it comes from all of us. We need every voice to ensure that these important issues stay on the agenda. So definitely visit our calls to action page and get connected with Waterspirit on social. You, again, can visit our website, waterspirit.org, for more resources, or follow us to stay updated on our efforts. But every single small action can help build momentum toward a more just, accessible, and stable water future for New Jersey and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for building those connections to drinking water, water affordability, and single-use plastics. I encourage everyone to follow the work Rachel, Dawn, and Gina are doing in their regions. And I would now like to introduce our final panelist, Douglas Main. Douglas is a freelance journalist covering wildlife, science, nature, and a range of environmental issues, including the ecological and health impacts of microplastics. He has written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, Scientific American, The Washington Post, Technology Review, The New Lead, and The Guardian, among others. Over to you, Doug.
Thanks for that introduction, and it's great to be here. Thanks for joining, everyone. Right, so I'm going to talk about some of the reporting I've been doing over the last couple of years about microplastics and the impact on human health and the environment. So you probably know by now, you've probably heard that microplastics are everywhere. They are, in the deepest part of the ocean. They're in pristine Antarctic snow, and they're also in our bodies. And it seems like every week, there are new headlines about where we're finding microplastics. So I wanted to highlight three major findings that I think really jump out in the last year. And all of this is, of course, relevant to policy because I think we need to have clarity on the science in terms of where microplastics are and what they might be doing. to our health and to the environment. But it's sometimes hard to know what is important because there's so much going on. I've decided to focus on 3 studies. The first one came out last March in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's one of the best medical journals in the world. And so this study looked at more than 300 patients in Italy, and it looked to see if it could find microplastics in plaques that were removed from the carotid artery of people undergoing this procedure. Basically, the scientists found almost 6 in 10 people, they found microplastics made up of polyethylene, and then PVC microplastics in a smaller portion. Then the researchers followed these people looking at health outcomes for the next 34 months. And what they found was relatively shocking. They found that the people who had microplastics in their arterial plaques um, were 2.1 times more likely to have a heart attack, a stroke, or to die in the next 34 months, which is, not really not a long period of time. One of the reasons why I wanted to highlight this study is that so there has been sort of a revolution in the study of microplastics in the last few years. I mean, the term microplastics was only coined in 2004. And the early studies were mostly, like looking for microplastics and things just visually, like under a microscope. But there have been a lot of advances in the last couple of years in terms of measuring the mass of particles and also what polymer they're from. So we are really finding out a lot more about where microplastics are. The next step, which is just kind of starting, is figuring out what are the health, like, so what are the health impacts? And this study is suggesting that there are definitely likely health impacts to these microplastics. And um, obviously we should try and reduce exposure. This is another shocking study. So for the first time in this study that was published finally last month in Nature Medicine, also a very good journal, I wrote about it for the first time publicly in August for the New Lead and the Guardian. But the study, when it was still in preprint, it hadn't been peer reviewed yet, but it kind of started a huge firestorm of attention. The study out of New Mexico, University of New Mexico, found microplastics in the brain, and they found microplastics in the brain in much higher quantities than they expected, and much higher quantities than would ever be considered uh, healthy. Obviously, no concentration would be considered healthy, but the point is they found very high quantities. They found microplastics basically in quantities, concentrations 10 times higher than in other organs like the liver and the kidney. That was just a picture from the Guardian article in August, and then I wrote about it again when it finally came out officially in February. So basically, what they found, the median concentration in brain samples was nearly 5,000 micrograms of plastic per gram of brain tissue. This was taken from a part of the prefrontal cortex. And basically, by one measure, that's almost 0.5% by weight. So that means, 1/200th of the brain was made up of plastic. So that is not good. I think that we're still understanding what this means. But another part of this study, though, that did hint at a possible impact is that they looked at 12 brains from people with dementia, and they found much higher quantities than in the so-called healthy brains, sometimes 10 times more. So from the 26 brains collected in 2016 and then the 24, I believe, brains collected in 2024, those are the red diamonds, and that is the y-axis is concentration of microplastics, and then above are the brains with dementia in purple. And as you can see, those are all higher than any of the healthy brains. Half of those people had Alzheimer's. So this is definitely not showing yet that microplastics cause degenerative disease, but it is hinting at a connection. And maybe in these diseases there could be impaired clearance or something like that. But I think it points out an urgent area for further research. And then I wanted to finish. I wanted to point out one more study that doesn't directly relate to human health, but indirectly certainly does. This is a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences just 10 days ago. This is from coverage in Scientific American. So this paper found, this was a review of other studies on the topic, and basically it found that microplastics can reduce photosynthesis in plants by up to 12%. And that, I mean, it has obvious concerns for agriculture, but also for the health of the environments, because plants are the primary producers of energy. Everything relies on the energy from the sun being converted into carbohydrates by plants. I bring all this up to say that, well, to point out the important research. I'm a journalist, not an advocate, but I think that, I mean, I obviously have a point of view, and I think pointing out the research and where it's at, highlighting, like, even though this is research and not advocacy, I think it's fair to say this is like a flashing alarm signs that there is a major problem here. When you're finding microplastics in the brain, you're finding that microplastics are associated with increased risk of heart attack and death in a short period of time in this one Italian study. It's still early days because, like I said, I mean, we've literally only had the word microplastic in the English language for like 20 years. And But I think that there's reason enough. All this research is suggesting there is certainly reason enough to minimize exposure, and you can't minimize exposure without reducing production. Ultimately, I don't think there's any good good faith person who would disagree with that, because as production goes up, ultimately pollution goes up. And one thing I forgot to mention in the brain study is that the average concentration in the quote unquote healthy brains, just from 2016 to 2024, the average concentration has gone up 50%. And that's approximately also how much the quantity of plastic pollution has gone up. So there's kind of a pretty strong correlation between the amount of plastic pollution in the environment and the amount of plastic pollution in our brains. And so that to me, that makes it incredibly clear that we need to be working on reducing exposure. And yeah, that's all I have to say for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug, for covering the recent alarming research on microplastics and its impact. I fully agree to stop the harms of plastic. We do have to cap production. We're now going to move onto the discussion part of our panel. I'll ask all our panelists to come back on camera. And I'll start by asking our panelists some questions that were submitted by attendees ahead of time, but please feel free to drop more questions in the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to answer those live. I think I'll start by putting this question over to Gina. An attendee had submitted a question saying, I'm excited to learn more about how we can educate the public on trusting tap over bottled, because I don't think every tap is equal. So how can we rebuild public trust in their local tap? What are maybe some best practices?
Yeah, so I think some best practices are ensuring transparency, lots of socialization and education, and community involvement. And so when we're encouraging transparency, I think we're advocating for more frequent testing of local water sources and pushing for easy access to water quality reports. When people see regular updates on water quality, it builds confidence that their water is safe. And also just community involvement. I think, there needs to be more school initiatives. Schools are an excellent place to start, educating younger generations about the benefits of tap water. And then community programs, again, partnering with local community centers to hold educational events about the benefits of tap water, to how to advocate for, the safest drinking water possible, and how to care for local water systems. And I think lastly, just like creating more convenience for tap water. I remember growing up, like there was like a bunch of water fountains, and like I barely see any anymore. And so like when I go to festivals, like I think it's really cool that they have these water refill stations, and it's encouraging you to like bring, your reusable water bottle. Um, and just, yeah, I think that, if we ensure transparency, education, and community, will kind of alleviate this distrust.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think, we definitely need culturally relevant education and in community languages so everyone can access, that education and building trust in the tap and filters and dispelling those myths about bottled water. I don't know, Rachel, if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, Gina, I think you did a really good job covering it. But yeah, basically raise awareness, raise awareness, raise awareness, right? Like host community workshops that are led by the community. Those things will help create, especially if they're more consistent, lasting change. You can have also just involving everyone because this involves everybody, right? Water knows no bounds. This is all common ground for everyone. So to the extent that you can have town halls, that would be a great opportunity. But overall, just advocating for water justice is something that we can involve everybody in. So the push for policy change can belong to everyone and they can feel more ownership over it.
I love that everyone can be involved. I'll point this next question at Doug. From a journalist perspective, what is the public awareness of the harms of bottled water, and where do you think that understanding needs to go?
I think specifically with with bottled water, I think there is definitely a lack of um, awareness out there about the potential harms, in part because um, of concerns about tap water in certain places, that Gina and Rachel have mentioned. Um, I think that some people, yeah, I mean, the microplastic side of things with this is still kind of evolving. I mean, like I said, in terms of proving like health effects with exposure to microplastics, we're not really there in terms of like proving exactly what it does. But there are areas where we know exposure to phthalates that come from plastic, is associated with various increased risk for various bad outcomes. So I think like, I mean, I view part of my role as a journalist to help spread this kind of information. I think that there's still a fair amount of lack of awareness about this.
Yeah, yeah,
And then the very specific, like, I mean, it depends what you're worried about, right? It's and of course you don't want to have to be in a situation where you're choosing between like lesser harms. And I think I'm inspired hearing Gina and Rachel Dunn talking about like efforts to um, improve like having everyone having access to clean water is a human right, and one shouldn't have to drink plastic bottled water for that. And so like that's part of what animates me as a journalist.
yeah. That's something similar, I think, to what we say. You shouldn't have to pick your poison. If you have lead pipe,
Mhm.
your alternative shouldn't be plastic bottled water, another exposure to toxics. I don't know, Gina or
Mhm.
Rachel, Don, if you want to expand, what's the community awareness in your regions? Where do you think it maybe needs to go?
I could talk about Chicago. I mean, I feel like, oh, people are desensitized. I mean, I remember buying my house 2 years ago, and when I had the inspector come over, I was like, "Do I have a lead service line? Because I've never seen one before." And he was like, "Oh yeah, but it's fine. It's like no big deal." And I was like, "No, it's like a big deal." I have, I had a 10, my son's 10, and I have a newborn, and I don't want to drink plastic bottles. Like that's like a huge trigger for me, like growing up drinking those, and then like knowing that filters run out, and then when you have a filter on your faucet, like you can't put hot water on it because then it becomes obsolete. Like there's like filters are great, but like I want to get to the root of the problem. Like I want to just have like clean drinking water. And I live in Chicago. Like we're supposed to have like the freshest water source, and I want accessibility to it, but it's going through a lead straw. And so just I think advocating again at the root level of the problem. Um, and, like this really helps in the long run, the disproportional health harms to environmental justice communities. This is like one thing, like one and done we can accomplish, like removing lead service lines. And then, folks can put all their effort again into like, you know, addressing like lead and arsenic in their soil and, PM 2.5 in the air, unfortunately. But like this is something that is solvable um in our lifetime. And like generations don't have to keep relying on bottled water and getting harmed with plastic microplastic pollution. This is something that is achievable. So I think this education is key for communities like mine.
Yeah, and I can say definitely the plastic bottled water industry that we're going up against, is very insidious. I know Rachel Dawn, that's an area you have some expertise in too, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, that's where I feel like I have a burning urge to say something about how, these are multinational corporations and they're extremely well orchestrated. And they have an aggressive marketing campaign that pivots bottled water as cleaner. It's, they're making the most of the perceived purity rather than the actual health benefits. And I think, to the extent that there has been, at least when I was coming up as an advocate, a big movement to have filtered water on college campuses. And so I see more of filtered, bottle refill stations on college campuses. I'd love to see them more, but they do really help, I think, in terms of changing that behavior that you were talking about, Gina, so that people understand that this is a better way of life. But it's also the convenience factor that the company makes the most of, pivoting to all of us as consumers. And some do have to rely on this, but the EPA does not regulate this, so it's not safe, and it is a misnomer, but it's something that ongoing we all have to be educating people about. And to the extent that this is prevalent in our everyday conversation, especially specifically with the drought that I know it's happening globally, right? So I'm just lifting that up because it's definitely happening out here in the Northeast. We have a prolonged drought, and so it's something that we can weave into the conversation as these very well connected companies who have substantial political and economic power do what they need to do. We can also be doing what we need to do, which is really underscoring Gina here, educate.
Yeah, like you said, the industry is really tactful about how they fuel that mistrust. And then they're draining, local water sources at the same time. And they have this really tactful marketing strategy, putting this product that it's safer, it's spring water, it's cleaner, when in reality it's full of these toxics. And it's more expensive. And in reality also it's 2/3 is bottled water, is thought of bottled water is just tap water, with those added chemicals. I'm curious if, we can move towards, at the community level and on that individual side as well. And this is a good question for Rachel, Dawn, and Gina. What can we do at the community level and within our own homes to make sure water is safe?
Yeah, so we can definitely help to think about what's in our water, right? Like, let's do home testing, let's do community testing. And again, raising awareness, building initiatives like rainwater harvesting. Something that we do is we're actually hosting a rain barrel workshop. So anything that you can do to get the community together around water. We also offer green infrastructure support throughout really the state, but in particular where we're based in Monmouth County. And then, it really helping people, and this is something that we did with the water affordability criteria, was help people provide public comment. So we have, a training to do that on our website. If you go to the volunteer, there's an ambassador training. But this is something that we've been curating for any group of volunteers that wants this training. How to actually do these things should not be a mystery, and in fact, it should be that everybody knows how to partake in civic life, and again, really ensure they're doing their responsibility as watershed residents.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Gina.
Yeah, just echoing what Rachel said. I believe in water testing. I'm actually part of a study right now with Northwestern University that's testing water for lead, PFAS, and copper, and it is really easy and accessible, and it looks very similar to a COVID test. And so if we have access to something like that, I think folks would be like, oh, let me test my water before I give it to my kid. And that's just something that doesn't exist right now. And again, improvements in water infrastructure. We have to get these lead service lines out of the ground.
Definitely. I'll pose this next question to Douglas. What role does the media play in shifting the US away from single-use plastics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pointing out all of these facts that we've been talking about in terms of, well, the sheer scale, the scale of production, the scale of the problem, the scale of the pollution, pointing out that like 9% of plastic is recycled, depending on what you're talking about, but somewhere around there. Recycling is a very imperfect solution. I mean, it's not really a solution to waste in general. It is helpful in some cases, but it's not the end all be all. Pointing out that production has to be capped or decline at some point to solve the problem. I did a cover story for Technology Review, MIT Technology Review, a great publication. And the point of it was like, it was 3,000 words, but the point of it was that everyone in the space agrees that like production has to be capped and decline at some point to get a hold of the problem. Yeah, and also like in terms of pointing out the potential or likely health effects, I think that's also huge because people, I mean, people are distracted. They have a million things going on. But if they, are if they know about some of this research, microplastics are showing up in the brain in high quantities. Microplastics are associated in this study with like a increased risk of dying. And that's, I mean, I don't want to say that it's too extreme, but that was like the case in this one small study. I think that will, I mean, I only do what I do because I think that information needs to be out there, and I'm sure, and I have to hope that it will eventually like have an impact, right? If people know this, I think they'll be a lot less likely to want to use plastic in terms of, in relation to food, plastic touching food, plastic bottles, there's the more and more we learn, the more we know that like it's not a good situation. And plastic, like microplastics are showing at all these places they shouldn't be. So we need to minimize, especially with single-use plastics, because well, for obvious reasons, but in part the plastic pollution problem is just keeps getting worse.
Yeah. And now with the recent news that there's a plastic spoon's worth of microplastics in our brain and that it's accumulating over time, it's definitely should not be there. I'll take it back to something Rachel Dawn brought up during your talk on water affordability. Of course, if folks in the community have their water tap shut off, then they're often then relying again on plastic bottled water. But I'm curious, how does privatizing tap water affect clean water access and water equity?
This is a really important question. I really appreciate this. So really, local communities do not and should not give up or cede control of their water sources. It would be a very bad idea, and it's increasingly happening. Companies that are privatizing water are seeing the municipalities across the country that are in debt and preying upon them. I am speaking on behalf of Waterspirit. Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, addresses the urgent need for specifically solidarity and caring for our common home, which includes the distribution of water. Water is a basic human right, and it should not be a privilege that is subject to economic power, is what he says. And I think that that's just really important to think about. At our core, we are made of water. As Douglas was saying, it should alarm everyone that these things are happening to our water. But this privatization is particularly harmful and impactful in vulnerable and marginalized communities that have already historically experienced and continue to experience cumulative impacts of systemic inequalities. And so the ethics of this are really, really not great. And so overall, we've seen that this is a trend where private companies go into a relationship or own at least part of a system and then eye on the whole system. And then also ultimately some variable rates that may be temporary initially become permanent. And so this is something that we are continuing to look at specifically in New Jersey at the State Board of Public Utilities, as the rates continue to fluctuate, as as these things are allowed to go up on. and do what Gina and I do, which is educate people about these things, especially those that have already been privatized.
Yeah, and it's a good remembrance just that our planet is 70% water, we're that same percentage of water. We're very interconnected. One really good question I'll post to Doug is a practical question submitted was, what water filters are the best to remove lead, PFAS, as well as microplastics?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I've talked to people who are experts. So a lot of the activated carbon filters are good. I think that depending on what you are worried about, you need to make sure that the activated carbon filters, like the Brita filters, will filter it out. So some research is probably some individual research is definitely recommended depending on what you're worried about. There are some things that those don't take out. Like there are some like arsenic. They're not always perfect for lead. So if you're not super constrained by budget, um, reverse osmosis is generally better at removing. It removes more, like a wider suite of contaminants. And then there's some other options too, that might make sense in certain circumstances. Distillers can remove some stuff. But yeah, I mean, activated carbon, make sure that the specific model removes what you're looking for. Like activated carbon can remove lead, but it has to be the right type. But yeah, reverse osmosis is a little better, but less convenient and more expensive is basically how I would summarize it.
No, that's really helpful. And I think we often point to the National Sanitary Foundation as well as a standard to look for.
Mhm.
We can always drop a link to that. But this
Mhm.
is a really good place just to wrap our questions. I want to just pose to each of our panelists if you have a few closing thoughts. Maybe we start with Doug first and then Rachel, Don, and then last over to Gina.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I guess one more thing I wanted to say was, and actually in a previous question uh, about what can journalists do, what can the media do to shift away from single-use plastics? So like to be specific, there's this UN process undergoing the UN treaty to reduce plastic pollution. And the last planned meeting took place in November after the election. I think that there was some movement towards the US supporting a cap on plastic pollution, but that was the prior administration, and it certainly did not come easy, and there was some backtracking too. I think what I'm trying to say is public knowledge and prioritization of this is really important and necessary for policymakers to do something. And yeah, I mean, we all know. I think everyone in this space knows kind of the political situation. Plastic manufacturers are almost one and the same with big oil in many cases, and you can't imagine a more powerful sector. But I think it's also important to not be too to remember that people on the other side are people too, and to not be super divisive in how we talk about this, but to also recognize the situation, and politics and power dynamics can't be removed from any of this. So yeah, I mean, knowledge is power. The plastic situation is it's one of those things where, like, the more I learn about it, most things that I learn about, like, I'm excited and I'm like, I'm so happy that I'm learning about this. But with plastics, it's like the more I learn, it's like, man, I really don't like this, and I almost don't want to know this, but like I feel an urge to like spread the information because it's so important. The point is, like, knowledge is power, and I think that if we want change, we're gonna have to advocate for it.
Thanks. Over to Rachel, Don.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that, Douglas. I wanted to, I guess, also say microplastics monitoring is going on in the state. There are several organizations in New Jersey working on this, including Waterspirit and New Jersey NAACP. But research is being done to make it better, as you know, probably, Douglas. But also there's technology that's emerging for filtering PFAS, PFOA, and some of those things are happening in the state, including, wastewater. But I just want to, I guess, in my closing, say wherever we are, we all have a role to play in ensuring that clean water remains affordable and accessible to everyone. Let's make the most of our time here. And I wanted to, specifically because of what you just shared, Douglas, and I do feel the same way about plastic, we do offer eco-anxiety support. And so that's, we have a resources page if anybody would like to check that out. But we are experiencing the sixth mass extinction. It is hard, it is tough, it is long haul work. And so to that, let's, again, join together, and check out waterspirit.org. Happy almost World Water Day. We have our annual gala tomorrow, timed specifically for that. So happy World Water Day to everybody. Thank you.
World Water Day. Over to Gina.
Yeah, so I think as like a frontline activist, I often hear nothing about us without us. And so just really uplifting community expertise. And there's not a lot of health data in these communities, and a lot of it's anecdotal, and it needs to be taken seriously, that qualitative data, because it's not a coincidence that folks have autoimmune disease and these other mystery diseases. It is because of drinking water and microplastics. And so just ensuring that there is a shared responsibility amongst lawmakers and industry to ensure clean drinking water for all.
The perfect closing. Thank you. Just a very special thank you to all of our panelists, Rachel, Dawn, Doug, and Gina, for joining us today, for letting us into the brilliant work you're doing and providing your insight on the interconnections between water access and plastic pollution. I'm going to plug our next webinar. This is Your Brain on Plastic, What You Need to Know About Plastics and Health. If you haven't already, we invite you to join our global coalition. It is currently free to join as an individual, business, or nonprofit organization. And you can connect with us on social media to learn more about our work. We'll also be sending out a follow-up survey after the webinar, and we really appreciate your feedback. It'll help us improve our future events. I want to really thank everyone again for being here. Thank you also to our Plastic Pollution Coalition member groups and partners who shared this webinar with their communities and networks. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar on April 16th. See you soon. Thank you.